Okay, so I think we've got, or some of the folk are having some issues joining, but I don't want to hold things up too much. And we are recording this, so anything that they miss, they can come back and have a look at later. So first of all, thank you for joining today's webinar on bridging the gap between IT and OT cybersecurity. Today's webinar is being recorded, as I said, and it's part of a series of webinars that Barrier are putting on, focusing on OT security and IT OT security consolidation. We have Steve McKee from Cisco on the call, who can introduce himself when he comes on, and Ryan McConaughey, Chief Technology Officer from Barrier. For those of you who aren't familiar with Barrier, we are a UK-based cybersecurity company. We focus on managed services and security consultancy, and we have a particular focus on OT security and have been doing it probably for about the past 6 or 7 years across various verticals: energy, water, utilities, manufacturing, food processing, maritime, a whole bunch, to be honest. So first up, we've got Steve McKee. He's going to talk a bit about Cisco's experience within the kind of the journey through industrial security, and then Ryan will talk about probably one of the first steps that we see as adding value on an OT security maturity program, where we look at segmentation to kind of reduce the attack surface as one of the first steps to improving your security posture. So Steve, you're up if you'd like to share your screen.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for the introduction. That's very kind. So what I was kind of hoping to do was almost just set the scene a little bit for Ryan, because I think the kind of meat of the session today hopefully is going to be Ryan demonstrating, I guess, some of the things that I'm going to kind of talk about, and demonstrate, I guess, yeah, kind of some of the solutions technology that would kind of help bridge the gap between kind of IT and OT kind of operations. So here I've maybe got 5 or 6 slides that hopefully set the scene about the journey to securing industrial networks, because it is a journey, right? Where, there are people at different stages of that kind of security journey. But the reality is, it's a journey that everybody really has to go on. Now, there is no option. You've kind of got to do it. So as Ian says, my name is Steve McKee. I'm a cybersecurity specialist here in Cisco. Been with Cisco about maybe 18 years or so, and in that kind of security space for that period of time. Cisco has a very specialised industrial kind of business unit, as hopefully some people will kind of understand. And really kind of security within that business unit is embedded. It is not an add-on, an overlay, an afterthought. How do we then kind of think about securing the industrial kind of networking environment? It's usually embedded within the industrial products that we build. So the reality, particularly within the industrial space, the operational technology space, is that, yeah, we're beginning to see it being targeted. And we probably began to see it a number of years ago. There's a good old, name that if I probably mention it, it might make some people's kind of hair stand on end and things, and that was Stuxnet back in the day. But that was probably one of the kind of first operational technology attacks that got global kind of coverage. And it began to make people think, how are we protecting operational technology networks, particularly as they become more IT oriented, as in they become more connected and embedded within kind of the IT kind of operations. But again, so this slide is just, saying, yeah, scary things happen and they ain't going to stop. It kind of happen and they will continue to happen. We need to make sure that we're in a good position to protect ourselves and then also respond to those threats and attacks as they kind of happen. And the reality, particularly, so the title of the presentation was Bridging the Gap Between IT and OT. And the reality is that, you know, there shouldn't really be a gap anymore. IT and our colleagues working in IT and our colleagues working in OT should really be kind of working together these days. This is probably a kind of decent slide that just sets the scene a little bit, you know, because you'll hear people talk about terms, you know, and so, you know, there's a term called Industry 4.0, and that's kind of roughly speaking the phase that we're in, which is very much about capitalizing on technology, data, connectivity, in order to kind of gain efficiencies within that operational technology space, manufacturing, being able to use a lot more kind of data analytics tools, proactive monitoring, and kind of so on. But you know, going all the way back to 1969, where people would have termed that as being Industry 3.0, which is round about automation. And we're now in that Industry 4.0 kind of space. That then presents, you know, kind of challenges, because in essence, what it really means is we're using what would have been maybe kind of more mature IT connectivity mechanisms, Ethernet, for example, TCP/IP protocols going hand in glove with some of the, you know, well-known process control protocols and kind of so on. But we're absolutely at that stage now where IT and OT have to start to work kind of well together. And this is what this kind of slide talks to. And the idea being is that we kind of capitalize on the attributes, the valuable attributes of both teams. So typically speaking, in the world of IT, there are some cybersecurity skills that need to be kind of harnessed and used in order to secure the OT environment. There are certain nuances and things that have to be kind of learned by the IT teams, and kind of vice versa. Those working in the OT space with your particular skills and kind of capability then have to start thinking about the nuances of the kind of IT world. But the reality being is that these two spaces, these two categories are now kind of coming together, they're banging together. And yeah, the reality is that's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity for both sides to learn, to understand, and to be able to, you know, move things kind of further forward, kind of basically. What it kind of really means, particularly maybe from the IT space and the OT space, it probably requires learning some kind of new procedures. You know, it might have been back in the day, particularly within the OT networks, particularly those that were air-gapped, as in they were completely kind of separate and maintained separately. Maybe there wasn't as much rigor placed on things like lifecycle management and patching and being able to keep things up to date, and the typical, you know, what we call lifecycle management hygiene factors of just making things, you know, part and parcel of the standard process. What it kind of really means now is that those well understood, to a certain extent, IT procedures now being offered and made available within the OT space. And that might include things like, you know, even documentation, and well kind of understood documentation, and documentation that isn't static. It begins to live and breathe because things kind of change over time as well. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of OT environments might, you know, have some of these points might be kind of understood. So, for example, a lot of the OT environments, maybe some folks don't really kind of get a lot of visibility of what is connected there, what is actually attached, the traffic patterns and the paths. Maybe some devices and things you just can't patch at all because maybe they're maintained or managed by other operators, or maybe they're kind of so, what would you call it, kind of embedded within the process that you can't really kind of get the type of management you would desire to be able to kind of keep fresh and keep up to date. And then also the kind of operational technology specific protocols that are operating in that network, being able to understand them, you know, in kind of great detail, because they can obviously be used for good and kind of bad, good and evil. And then also I think a fact that's pretty well understood is that a lot of OT kind of networks have maybe multiple third-party connectivity requirements, you know, manufacturers requiring access to their devices in order to kind of maintain them or keep them kind of proactively kind of going. These things are kind of all well understood within the IT world, and yeah, there are some processes and rigors that hopefully allow, you know, these things to kind of still happen, but with a little bit more of a kind of visibility and management kind of overhead. Not overhead, it's not really an overhead, it's something that should be part and parcel and done. So in terms of the journey, it seems kind of reasonably obvious, but it's worthwhile kind of highlighting that it doesn't have to be hugely onerous. It just has to have a little bit of kind of rigor applied to it. So typically speaking, what it might mean is just understanding what's there and what's connected to the OT kind of networks. Yeah, having visibility is almost like you know, the first rung in the ladder, the first step in the journey, is that we're understanding what's there and what's connected. That might then lend itself well to looking at, well, do you know what, now that I understand what's there and what's connected, and I understand the traffic profiles and the kind of patterns, what I might want to start to do is then be able to segment, contain, compartmentalize that operational technology to be much more, you know, based on, you know, the operational intent. For example, would a PLC that handles one particular task need to be connected to a particular device that has got nothing to do with it and has got nothing to do with that process? The answer to that is typically, you know, no, it shouldn't be connected to the same kind of segment. It shouldn't be able to kind of talk to any other device if it's got nothing to do with, you know, the kind of process that it's involved in. So that's that compartmentalizing and kind of segmentation piece. And what you're trying to do then is just kind of reduce the potential for attack surface and create little areas of containment. And from there then, once you've got the visibility and segmentation done, being able to kind of monitor effectively for behavior and kind of change and things that, you know, you would want to be kind of alerted to. And then obviously with that monitoring and detection capability, being able to react to that, to respond to that, to be able to go and look at that and hopefully resolve and kind of mitigate against that. So these kind of seem pretty obvious, but you'd probably be amazed about the number of people that don't even do the basics, right? And so these we would consider as being the basics. And I think hopefully Ryan today is going to demonstrate probably a lot more of that network segmentation technology, a little bit of maybe the kind of visibility and asset discovery, and then a little bit of maybe the live threat detection. I think the plan is to kind of almost like use today as an introduction to a kind of webinar series, and then there'll be other, you know, kind of webinars that will kind of take place to do a little bit more deeper dives in each of these areas. How do we gain visibility? How do we detect? How do we respond to that? How can we segment? But in essence, it's those four areas, those four phases. But what that kind of really means, almost like a kind of early phase, particularly from a Cisco perspective, is then creating what we would kind of term as this kind of IT DMZ, demilitarized zone. So if you imagine the bottom part of the diagram here is the operational technology network, the kind of industrial kind of networks, and the top part of that kind of diagram is really the kind of IT capabilities and assets and things that you could make use of and capitalize on. But absolutely, you know, to make sure that there is no direct connectivity between both environments, and kind of creating this kind of concept of what's called the industrial, or IT rather, the IT or industrial demilitarized zone, a kind of area where people can understand that there's a demarcation point between the OT environment and the IT environment. It's a kind of obvious place to be able to kind of do that. And what that kind of means, kind of technically to a certain extent, and again, hopefully Ryan will go through this in a lot more detail than I will, but there are a number of models and things that you can look at whereby a typical, you know, kind of Purdue type model here within the OT environment continues and carries on as normal, but you would see this industrial kind of DMZ that attaches you to the rest of the IT network. What that then also allows you to do is start to create, you know, a standardized model for things like secure remote access for third-party contractors. It allows you to start to maybe share some of the telemetry and data models that could help, I guess, the manufacturer of the equipment to kind of gain visibility in the performance of the controller or the industrial kind of device and things. But it starts to kind of provide a nice wee place, a place in which you can create a demarcation point between the OT and kind of IT kind of environments. But I think that was me in terms of just trying to kind of set the scene. As I say, just to kind of summarise, that the IT and OT thing is not in conflict anymore, right? It's kind of one of those things whereby, you know, OT colleagues and IT colleagues should be working together, and there's opportunity to kind of do things kind of properly when we do that, when we do work together. There are relatively simple staged processes to be able to start on that journey. You know, if they're planned and deployed and operated properly, it gives everyone a kind of fighting chance to be able to protect that OT environment. So hopefully it kind of sets the scene a little bit. You know, probably fed up listening to me now, and this is the more interesting thing, I think, now, which is me handing over to Ryan, and Ryan is hopefully going to demonstrate practically some areas of interest and kind of areas whereby, you know, the slides that I talk about, the theory, are now coming to reality. So Ryan, if I could hand over to you now, sir, and thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks very much, Steve. So, hi everybody, I'm Ryan McConaughey, Chief Technology Officer at Barrier Networks, and today I'm going to bring kind of a practical demo and some actual visibility of how a threat can enter an OT environment. So this is sort of real world. It's a demo environment because obviously no one was going to offer up their OT environment for me to go in and try and break things, sadly. What we're going to do is perform an initial breach, and then we're going to try and move laterally across our demo and IT environment. I'll talk along the way just about some core concepts and a couple of things, maybe reiterate, go into a bit more detail of things that Steve covered. At the very end, we'll have a kind of Q&A session for if you see anything here you want to talk more about, or if there's anything from Steve's presentation you want to get into more detail of. So, setting the scene, in our demo environment, Darren, who's our facilities manager, was interested in buying a new BMS system. Knowing this, we crafted a bit of a spear phishing email hack for sending some malware just embedded in a PDF, and that's allowed us to get access to his PC on the IT network. Feeling pretty good about that. So we're going to go from there and walk through simulated attacks using real tools and real assets. So here's a kind of overview of our demo environment. There I am at the top. For the purpose of this, I am Attack Hydra. Okay, that's my hacker pseudonym. I picked it very quickly, so it's probably not a very good one, but you've got to have a hacker pseudonym. So there it is. So from there, we're going to start. And I have pre-recorded the technical part of this. It's all real commands, no smoke and mirrors. This is real tools available to pretty much anyone, and this is what we can do with them. So from our attacking PC, what I'm going to start with is Nmap scan. You might know this sort of thing. This is just looking for what's live on a particular network. I'm scanning a small subnet on the industrial network. Could have scanned the whole thing, but it takes a long time. We found one, which is good, as intended. And what we're going to do is another Nmap scan. We're going to look for live services on this device, see what's running on it, maybe fingerprint the OS, find out if we can exploit it. So this is going to just target it, connect to it, and just see what's running. I've already got a couple of hits. That's quite good. So you might not know this stuff, but essentially what I can see immediately is we've got 3389, which is remote desktop. So that might be something. We've got SMB, so kind of what you might use for transferring files between Windows machines. So strong hint that this might be a Windows-based device we're looking at. A bunch of other ports. There's like NetBIOS as well. So there's a few things we might be able to get our hooks into. Sped up the recording a little bit here, just obviously to keep the flow going, because you don't want to stare at a kind of static screen for any time. But what we're going to get is a bit more information. It flashed by, so I'm going to go back again and just look, and we're getting some good information here. I quite like the fact it's got Windows 7 Professional, so reasonable confidence that's what we're dealing with. And from here, there's an attack I think we can use. If the host's unpatched, which given the environment, good chance it is, we might be able to leverage an old Microsoft security bulletin, particularly 17010, which concerns the server message block protocol, SMB, the one I pointed to above. So this is me just running a wee check on using the Metasploit framework. Open source tool, available to almost anyone. And this shows you the kind of the barrier to entry into exploiting machines is really low. So anyone can do this with a bit of reading. So this is the sort of thing. The exploit checker has come back. We've got ourselves a vulnerability, likely. So we'll go for it proper. We'll actually send that vulnerability down to the machine. Oh, sorry, exploit that vulnerability and see if it works. With the proliferation of these tools, this is where your simple network segmentation is probably not going to cut it. You're going to have to bring in something a bit more heavyweight to segment your network. Just jumping in there and interrupting the flow nicely just before you see the good stuff. Coming back to our diagram. So this is what we've got, and this is a bit more information. We've got this IP address we found in the Nmap scan. That's on this device here. I don't necessarily know this is Attack Hydra, but as the network manager, I do know that. And that's our source address, 10.0.50.50. Jumping back to the vid, we'll see what happens when we get going here. So we're calling in the exploit proper, setting the host, pick our target, we're going to go in there, and it's this simple. Away it goes. Again, this is all stuff it's doing. This is openly available tooling. I'd like to profess to being a master hacker, but with tools this easy, why do I have to bother? And that's what a lot of people will be thinking. So we've got this Meterpreter shell now, so that means we're on. Doing a wee check, see if we can find out. We're under the system account, that's not really going to tell us much. We'll root around the C drive, look on the actual machine's file system, see if we can find anything good. User's a good place to start. Operator account, that might be good. I'd be looking for something like administrator 2 potentially. Let's just see, right, some stuff in the file directory. Check on the desktop in case anyone's left anything. That's a good dumping ground for valuable information. Oh, no, nothing there. Probably go to My Docs. Sometimes good stuff in My Docs too. That's where they might be saving configuration devices, maybe recipes or diagrams, all sorts. You just don't know. Fat finger the command on that video, but can't have everything. Oh, damn. Access denied. Right. Oh, another plan. We'll take a screenshot of the desktop. This will give us a screenshot of the actual machine that's running. And I'll bring this up in a sec. What I'll do is also bring in the terminal showing the desktop for the end device. And we'll just compare just to make sure this is what we're seeing. So yeah, I'm going to bring it in there. The picture in the window there, that is the actual desktop of the machine that's running. And as we can see in our demo environment, this machine controls some sort of pump, some water treatment maybe, not quite sure. As an attacker, I'll just have to figure that out. But hang on a sec, up here in the top corner, that's an IP address, I think. 172. That looks like an IP address to me. Hang on, maybe we'll see if we can get something else. Let's jump around here. Let's see if we can move laterally onto another machine. So from my attacking machine, I'm going to take that IP address and I'm going to try and hit it directly. So I'll just pop another terminal here just so we've got our session in the background. Same as before, Nmap scan of the new IP address, see what I can find. I'm going to go straight for ports because I don't need to find it on the subnet. See what it's running. Ah, no dice. Hang on a sec. This isn't good. I can't connect to it. That's not what I want. Jump back to the presentation here. So we'll see. Got this new device over here. So it's on a different part of the network, different subnet. From the attacker perspective, different subnet, must be something going on there. Maybe this device in the center is doing a bit of just some basic blocking. What we might be able to do here, we're going to maybe use the first device as a jumping off point. See if we can get going round the houses the way. So what we'll need to do, we'll quit out this session here. And then we're going to have to add in a wee route to the new host that goes via our first session. I'm kind of talking you through what I'm doing here. You know, if you're experienced enough, you'll be able to pick out this stuff, but just spelling it out, just kind of, it can be this easy. And I thought for a bit of flavor, use a different particular exploit this time. Well, same exploit, but a different utility with which to do it. So this will be PS exec attack instead. And well, we're making an assumption this is another Windows 7 host. And again, just keeping the flow moving just to try and do this without bogging down watching me doing Nmap scan after Nmap scan. We're just going to quickly do this to kind of demonstrate just how quickly it can be to move into the OT environment, start traversing laterally, and once you're in the system, you've got quite a bit of control, quite a bit of options. Do we exfiltrate data? Do we take control? Do we mess up the processes? Or just be lazy, ransomware it all, set up the Bitcoin wallet, and wait for the money to pour in? So here we go, we're running the second exploit. You can see on there that it's a PS exec one instead of the Eternal Blue from before. Eternal Blue is one of the NSA tools that they chose to develop rather than telling everyone about the vulnerability. And there we go, successfully through the first host, we've reached the second. Trying the same tricks as before, not a lot of information from GetUID, but what we'll do is, just to prove that we've compromised this host, I'll bring in the screen from that particular one, and all we'll do is we'll just upload a file onto it. If I can upload a file onto it, pretty good example of how I've got a reasonably good degree of access into this network and the hosts that are already running there. So again, operator count. Move on to the desktop, and then we'll bring in the host in the top corner so you can see it happening. Grab the file name. I have a convenient image at hand already that I captured from the first host, so just copy that in. That'll be the file we'll upload. And there's our target machine. Fat fingered the command on the first attempt again. And there we go. Image is now there. So pretty simple stuff to get that far. Going to come back to the slide. Just want to talk a bit about the Purdue model that was mentioned in Steve's presentation. Whether you're familiar with it or not, it's worth just kind of knowing a little bit more here, but don't get too caught up in the dogma of it. The idea is you want to think about your network and layers. What the layers are called is maybe less important. The main thing is just understanding where all your assets sit, and don't try and focus on shoehorning your network onto this model, because it probably won't work. At the same time, designing a network based on this model probably won't work either, but that's not the important part. The main thing is, well, what did we just do? We went from the enterprise network down to an HMI. So it went from level 4 to level 2. It could be level 5 to level 3, it doesn't really matter. The important part is the whole premise of the Purdue model is that you don't move laterally across layers more than one step. So going 4 to 2, we've skipped 2 layers entirely. That's a pointer. That's something that's the real thing. Should I be doing that? Probably not. You shouldn't be having access that moves so dramatically far from where it came. You should have stop-off points in the middle. The more points of enforcement, the better. The more defense in depth, the strategy of defense in depth, the better. Because you want to stop someone on the internet connecting directly to a PLC and dumping all your precious chemicals into a river or something like that, or overriding a surgery laser in the middle of operation, something, the scope is endless, and that's where you want to just think about the path this traffic takes. In an ideal world, a third-party person accessing a PLC, they would connect into a VDI, they would go through a chaperoned access system, they would then connect to a workstation that then controlled the PLC. They shouldn't be going one step and done, because one vulnerability and done. So this is where we are now. We've got this discovery, and for the next part of the demo, we're going to bring in Cisco Secure Firewall, and we're going to pop it right there as a segmentation point for all these networks. So keeping it live in the demo, that's what we're going to do. I'll show you. Here we are in the Cisco Secure Firewall Management Center, and we'll pick up there. So all we're doing here is enabling the intrusion prevention. I pulled a little sneaky one there where the firewall's actually been in place the whole time, but it's been purposefully disabled so as to allow the attacks to happen. That's not how you would typically deploy it, but for demo purposes, this is what we're trying to highlight. The firewall was effectively acting like a very simplified gateway or a rudimentary non-next generation firewall. So all we're doing here, change the policy, enable IPS, deploy the policy. This process has been sped up a little bit here, just again, to keep the flow moving. Firewall policy can take a little bit longer to deploy than the few seconds it's just done there. And what we're going to do now, straight back to the beginning. We're going to run that first attack again and see how we get on. To cover the point, I'm going to rerun the second Nmap scan of the initial host. Well, so we'll run the first one and then we'll run the second one. Both of these are going to succeed because an Nmap scan, there's valid reasons for doing that. It's not necessarily a vulnerability. The firewall won't step in and stop on that, but stop you that happening. it will report on it. It might highlight it as a lower severity, but an actual port scan, there could be a legitimate reason for that. It's not a cut and dried intrusion event. Same result as before, no difference. Jump back into the Metasploit framework, and again call on that same Eternal Blue exploit of the Microsoft 17 security vulnerability. So what we're hoping here is that the firewall does something as opposed to before where the exploit just happened. Right. I cut away from the demo video, apologies. Didn't miss anything there. We just set the host, start the vulnerability. So it's a way of doing all the same actions as before, trying to leverage the same vulnerability on that host to try and get our hooks into it. And here we've hit ourselves, hit a wee snag. So we've got a communication error, and very shortly we're going to get a crash out to the console. So we don't have access this time. We'll jump over to the Firewall Management Center and we'll see what's going on over there. So here we are in the initial just dashboard page, and you can see intrusion event summary. We've got both our top attackers, well, 105050, that's my compromised machine on the IT network, and the other one just below it, that's the first host we compromised. It's an attacker because we jumped through it to get to the second host. Both the end devices are showing up under targets. So here we can see some bad stuff's happening at a very high level. Quick summary. You can jump in and look at the individual hosts, get a bit of a host profile as far as the firewall sees it. Because the firewall's looking at the traffic, it's going to be able to make some assumptions about what's going on. It sees ports, it sees the direction, so it can infer, oh, this is a server, that's a client, could be running a web server, we'll see here on the second device that it's actually got a bit more information about it. We've got, most importantly, indications of compromise. That's a concern. Impact 1, pretty much a certainty. We're dealing with a problem right there. And Impact 2, something we definitely want to be paying attention to. Also, the highlighted section there, Microsoft Windows, it's got version 10, so it thinks it's Windows 10, but the firewall's looking at traffic, it's making some guesses. It's not fingerprinting the host like we did with Nmap. So it knows it's Microsoft Windows. 10 is a little bit of a guess. Below it, you can see the protocols that we observed. Again, they came up probably mostly because of the Nmap scan that they were first detected. And again, there's a lot of information here. You can refine this, obviously. We could tell the Firewall Management Center that this is in fact Windows 7, and that will allow it to make more accurate assertions about incoming attacks and such going forward, because it might not highlight that attack if it was against a Windows 11 machine that was fully patched. It might, the vulnerability doesn't exist, therefore it would downgrade it. It wouldn't be a concern. Now we're on the connection events table. This is just looking at traffic through the firewall. I filtered the view because a lot of traffic goes through these, so we want to look at what's happened. And here we can see where it blocked the intrusion event. If I'd expanded the time scope a bit to include the original attacks, you would have seen action allow, and reason it would have said would have blocked because it was in detection mode rather than prevention. So this is us just seeing the initial attack from the attacking PC to that first host, HMI 17. On another screen, we can look at security events. So rather than specific to this host and that host, it's about what attacks are being seen on the network. Quite simple here, quite quiet. We're only seeing this one particular attack during the time window. And again, SMB, remote code execution, it's got it. It knows what we were doing. We can download the packets. If you want to submit those for analysis or take them to some security research, they're available. If you're just interested, you can see this information. It's there, all collected on the Management Center. More holistically, a host indication of compromise. Throughout the time that the firewall is running, it can see where compromise is happening. And it can give you all of this at once, allowing you to focus your efforts where they need to go. If something's going on and there's an incident you need to attack, you need to prevent attack or prevent spread, you can see what's already been hit, and you can remediate manually as necessary. There are integrations with other Cisco products that allow for automatic remediation or isolation. I won't go into those outside the scope of this. And again, just from these screens, you can jump back to the individual host screen. So that's the demo part. We're going to move on to a bit of summary here. So in the first instance, the firewall was able to detect the original attacks, but it was sitting in detection mode, so it did nothing. As soon as we turned on prevention, we shut off that first attack, which prevented the second lateral movement attack we would have done. We didn't get to do it because we couldn't. So automatically, your next-gen firewall is stepping in and really proving its value, because it's not just allowing ports and protocols, it's looking at the packets, it's looking for intrusion detection, it's looking for known attacks, and it's trying to stop them. The other thing it's doing is it can look for files and do malware analysis. In the event where you've got craftier attackers than just me with my simple tools, you've got TLS decryption. In case they're encrypting traffic, you can do that. Cisco's encrypted visibility engine looks at traffic, looks for anomalies, looks for metadata within the packet without decrypting the payload, where decryption is impossible or you need to maintain a level of throughput. I alluded a bit to the kind of integrations. Obviously, Cisco's got a full security portfolio. Won't spend ages going into those, but allow for automatic remediation, automatic isolation, or even just tying down a client to allow it to still operate, but in a much more restricted fashion. Integration with likes of Cisco XDR, where you can track these events and the security intelligence comes together as a whole to allow you to contain a breach or ascertain a bit more information about an attempted breach. The Cisco Secure Firewall is a very good intro to the segmentation piece. It's an important part of any defense in depth strategy and something that's well worth considering for OT environments. Where you have particular environmental concerns, there is ruggedized versions that are more form factor appropriate for the likes of industrial enclosures. Moving on, I think it's kind of come to the end of the demo section, and I've kind of moved to like to open up the floor for any questions. If you do have any, please pop them in the Q&A window or in the chat window, or raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Thanks, Ryan. So yeah, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat, probably just to recap a little bit. We've seen Ryan in the kind of Barrier OT lab, just doing a very basic exploit from a kind of attacker machine into a kind of vulnerable embedded system running an earlier version of Windows than it really should have. MS1710 is a very well-known vulnerability. It was the one that was used for exploiting WannaCry and kind of wreaked havoc globally. So very easy to exploit. Ryan was using the open source version of the Metasploit framework. Most of the attacks that we see are not using Metasploit, but they're using Metasploit under the hood. So Cobalt Strike, for example, has the Metasploit framework built into it. And then we've seen the kind of big uplift in security that we can offer by just implementing some basic controls and some basic segmentation. It's very difficult to implement kind of network policy, if you like, or to enforce network policy into most OT infrastructure or systems. But we can certainly add a huge amount of value by swapping out routers or switches and replacing them with firewalls, either at layer 2 or layer 3, and getting that visibility that we've seen Ryan kind of demonstrate there within that demo. And we used that video because we didn't want the demo gods not knocking our lab offline mid-webinar. We still got caught out, unfortunately, because we had 30 people trying to get access, and I think only 6 or 7 got in. So thankfully we've recorded it, but we'll follow up with the others. And then Steve from Cisco, a huge amount of experience in the industry and cybersecurity generally. He talked about kind of Industry 4.0 and the kind of industrial automation that we're seeing happening in kind of recent years. Highlighted 4 areas: kind of asset discovery. One of the things that we see in the IT kind of industry, you know, asset discoveries and kind of asset registers is one of the big first phases of building out your incident response planning. Usually within a kind of control system environment, we get that from spanning ports or network taps, and then some basic control system polling, whether it's through SNMP or things like Modbus. We then spoke about segmentation as being the kind of second thing within those 4 points, and Ryan's kind of highlighted that point. We often see secure zones being created, and where we don't have secure zones, we can go even further into kind of air-gapped systems. Usually put air-gapped into air quotes because most of them aren't actually air-gapped, but we see other technologies like diodes, data diodes being used in those areas in the kind of more secure environments. And then the threat detection, which we've just seen Ryan kind of highlight within the kind of Cisco Secure Firewall IDS engine, detecting the attack first of all, but then blocking it. And then I think the last point that Steve highlighted was kind of investigate and response. So your IR plans for OT systems are much different, really, in all honesty, from IT plans. We have a much wider stakeholder audience that we need to bring in. We have other issues like production and health and safety that we need to cater for, which we typically don't cater for within our IT IR plans. So from an OT security perspective, we need to look at incident response quite differently. And then we spoke a bit about, both of them spoke a little bit about the Purdue model and the various levels and why we have segmentation and why we try to control access from one zone to another. But the Purdue model is for the most part being replaced by IEC 62443, but it's still referred to. So I can't see any questions come in. If you have any, pop them in. I'll give it a couple of minutes. But thank you, Steve, for kind of going through the kind of industrial journey, if you like, and to Ryan for labbing that up. I think it's always beneficial to see what actually happens in practice against the theory of it. So this is the first webinar in a series that we'll be doing, where we'll actually try to showcase what the tooling that we can bring into OT environments does and the value that it adds. Data sheets are really good, but sometimes you just have to see the kind of real world impact of doing something as simple as dropping a firewall in. Of course, we could have blocked that attack just with the IDS engine without any policy applied from a kind of filtering perspective. But yeah, we will. The next one, I think, we'll look at much more control system specific. We're building out some of the other components kind of further down the Purdue model, if you like. So we'll try to showcase that. Steve, is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up?
Not really. I thought it was great. It was a great kind of demonstration. I think certainly from my point of view, what I see most customers who are on that journey, who might be at the less mature end of the spectrum when it comes to kind of security, looking to deploy, you know, some of the products that Ryan mentioned, like the Cisco Secure Firewall, but they deploy it in what's called a kind of transparent mode. there's nothing that really needs to be changed within the environment. They're really just like a bump in the wire. That's the usual terminology that's used, and that it doesn't require any change in IP addressing or traffic profiles or anything. They're just deployed in a transparent mode. And then sometimes what kind of customers do is they deploy in transparent mode, but almost like in a kind of listening kind of mode as well. It's not going to kind of interfere or do anything with the traffic, but what it's going to do is going to provide a lot of insight, both in terms of assets that it can see, but also in terms of the traffic profile, and possibly if it does see anything kind of anomalous. And so typically customers would then, deploy in that passive, transparent bump in the wire mode. Later on down the line, when you start to get a little bit more comfortable about what you're seeing in terms of the assets, the customers would then begin to switch on some of the protection services within the gateway, the firewall, the intrusion prevention system, whatever you would want to kind of call it. So I guess it's just a way of saying that the journey doesn't have to be kind of painful. I guess it can be quite gentle and kind of transparent if kind of done properly, and particularly with the right tools, because the last thing that you would want to do is start to interfere with production, right? I couldn't imagine anything worse, right? Interfering with kind of production. So there's that gentle kind of journey, and hopefully it doesn't require a huge, kind of uplift and kind of processes and change and kind of people. Nice gentle journeys, and I'm sure you guys, as in the Barrier team, you've been living and breathing it, right? I guess the last thing you want to do is install something and 10 minutes later be getting your door battered down with folk, who are jumping up and down about stuff, so.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest kind of challenges that we get, or blockers, is so one of the big challenges is managing the IT and the OT stakeholders and trying to kind of bring them together in such a way that they work collaboratively and not against each other. So giving them a level of assurance that you can introduce security controls without impacting production is quite a big part of that. So Andy's made a good point there actually about the different sectors being at different levels of maturity, and the kind of oil and gas being pretty good, but some other sectors being pretty poor. Yeah, I think a big reason for that is the oil and gas have a big spotlight on them from the HSE. So the HSE, the Health and Safety Exec, have a directive, OG 86, for the oil and gas sector, which has an element of cyber in it now. So you tend to find private sector will do the bare minimum, unfortunately, when it comes to security, because it's quite often, it's quite often, sorry, I'm agreeing with Andy there. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can read it as well,
So the private sector will typically do the bare minimum because it's almost seen as an insurance by a lot of organisations.
Yeah.
However, when the industry regulator pushes measures, we tend to see them being the most mature. So we work across a whole range of maturity levels, and that's part of the challenge, but also means that by working with some of the more experienced, that we learn some lessons ourselves and then can apply them to some of our customers who are kind of just starting out that journey. So I'm just conscious of time, so we'll wrap up there. Like I said, this is the kind of first in a series, so our marketing team will kind of send out probably another invite for the ones that never made it. So if you are a glutton for punishment, feel free to attend again. Otherwise, you can sign up for the next one we do in the series, but we will be kind of trying to kind of push the message and hopefully educate some of the stakeholders out there within the kind of OT space. So feel free to forward them on to any of your kind of asset managers, etc. Alrighty, Ryan, Steve, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for joining. This has been recorded, so that will be shared later. Thank you.